大家好，欢迎来到我们的直播。其实本来这场讲座呢是给2025的学生都说，因为之前我们是非常努力的，希望通过自己的热爱和天赋，能够尽量的进到一个特别好的学校。但现在呢，确实要考虑一个现实的一个回报。其实我经常会喜欢借用李飞飞的一句话：我们既要考虑实现自己的潜能和理想，同时要考虑自己对肩上的一个责任。那么这里呢，其实尤其是对有一些我们今年有一些文科生，就是将来他们到底能够从事什么样的职业？因为目前呢，文科确实是面临的很难就业这个问题。那么我们的今天的主讲，他也会分享他的一个职业思考，其实可能会对这些学生呢有很多的借鉴。另外呢，正好我们在准备这个直播的过程当中，遇到了哈佛的跟川普政府之间的这样一个事件。那么因为Philip 作为哈佛的毕业生，同时呢也是职业的律师，那么我们觉得其实对这个事件确实需要给大家做一些解读吧。尽量从一个法律和公正的角度，其实我们所给的建议不代表任何的立场，所以这就是我们今天这个直播我的大概的一个介绍。另外呢，我们上周我们有医学院的一个直播之后呢，很多家长过来问我们关于医学院的申请。我们目前呢，因为人手有限，医学院的申请呢，仅对本科跟我们签约的学生。同样，法学院的申请呢，Philip 作为一个我们的法学院方向的导师，我们目前也仅针对于本科，是我们的学生给一些指导和建议。好，我就不浪费时间了，让把时间交给 Philip。So, Philip, now it's your turn.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Zoe. So I'm excited to be with you all and talk about the keys to law school success. And those are hard work, practice, and the ability to make a strong argument. So today we're going to have 5 different topics. Those are the importance of law school, why I decided to go to law school during college, what makes successful law school application, how to ace the LSAT, which is the entrance exam that you need to, the standardized test you need to take to apply to law school, and then AI's impact on the law job market. And for each one of these, the keys are still the same. Their hard work, their practice, and the ability to make a strong argument. And so we're going to break down how to go through each one. And the end of each section, please ask any questions you might have, and I look forward to answering them. And that is one of the keys to a lawyer, is asking questions. So I expect a lot of questions, and I look forward to them. So first, why become a lawyer? And the answer is because the stakes are really high. And nothing demonstrates that more than the current lawsuit between Harvard and the Department of Homeland Security. So as many of you may know, on Thursday, the Trump administration announced that it would no longer allow Harvard to enroll international students. And that is a huge deal for Harvard because a quarter of its students are international, about 6,000. And part of what makes Harvard one of the best schools in the world, and part of what made my time at Harvard one of the best times I could have had, is because of all the international students who are the best and the brightest, who come from all over to study at Harvard. So this is kind of a defining question for America and for Harvard, and it's a question that's going to be answered by lawyers. As you guys know, or as you may not know, on Thursday, late in Thursday is when Harvard issued the order, and by 8 a.m. Friday morning, Harvard had already filed a 75-page complaint in United States federal court to try and challenge the ban. And that argument, the lawyers' challenge that Harvard filed, which was written by lawyers against the ban, rested on 2 arguments. And I'm going to walk through those just to demonstrate what lawyers think about, how they think about, and why lawyers are so important to how the law functions in the United States. So Trump, without much explanation, banned the international students. And Harvard claims that this was improper for 2 main reasons. First, it violated the free speech protections in First Amendment of the United States Constitution. And the second, that it violated the way the government is allowed to act, and that is through the Administrative Procedure Act, which I'll explain in a minute. So the United States Constitution is supposed to guarantee free speech. What that actually means in practice is much more unclear and is an open question. Trump thinks he has the authority to revoke visas for international students, and that doesn't mean he's violating Harvard's right to free speech. Harvard thinks that they have a right to have their views. As you may know, many people at Harvard dislike Trump intensely and have criticized his administration. And they think that Trump clamping down on Harvard is in retaliation for their viewpoint or what they think and how they express themselves. This is an argument that has to get played out in court. The second argument that the lawyers made is that Trump went about this in the wrong way. And as you'll notice, the lawsuit is Harvard versus Department of Homeland Security, not Harvard versus Donald Trump. And that's because in America, the president almost always acts through agencies. In this case, the Department of Homeland Security is the agency that runs visas and things like that. And the agency has laws about how it can act and what it can do. And the Harvard thinks that the agency violated those laws by suddenly on Thursday afternoon, out of the blue, canceling all the international visas. So that's under the Administrative Procedure Act, which is an arcane piece of legislation written 60 years ago that nobody really who is a regular person should ever have heard of. But it's an argument about the Administrative Procedure Act that is going to define whether Harvard can enroll international students. And that it's an act that you only know about really if you're a lawyer. You only think about you're a lawyer. And now we're seeing that the arguments being made in court by lawyers and things they've learned at law school. So that's the importance of law school, is these are the arguments that define how the world unfolds. I will say that it's very impressive that Harvard managed to submit a 75-page brief to the United States government with about 12 hours of warning. And that, I can tell you, is only because the lawyers are worked incredibly hard their entire career and have practiced for decades and decades and decades how to make a successful argument. And that's how, in 12 hours, they were able to turn around and submit this brief, this argument, to the United States court. And then, as happened yesterday, the court issued what's called a preliminary injunction. That means that they think Harvard is being harmed by the lawsuit. They think the lawyers have made a compelling argument. And it's not a final ruling, but it puts on hold the Trump ban on the international students. So as of right now, Harvard can continue to enroll international students while the court takes the time to really take a full look at this, and then it'll issue its final decision. But again, it'll be lawyers in that courtroom making that argument, and it's lawyers who managed to stop the international ban. So if you're wondering why law school is important, it's only those people who are here on the front lines that are making the decisions about how this huge policy that affects Harvard, that affects America, and affects the world unfolds. And that brings us to topic number 2. Sorry, does anybody have any questions?
So, let's give a couple, like 30 seconds. I would do a very quick summary here.
Okay.
其实就是大家也清楚，美国呢是政法分开的，就行政命令其实还是要如果受到法律的挑战的话，是无法执行的。这点呢是美国的立国之本，也就是说，大家就是现在就是那些哈佛的学生，他们能放心，暂时他们是安全了。那么下一步会什么样子呢？取决于就是在联邦法院的听证会。那么就是 Trump 这个政府也不会善罢甘休啊，他们肯定会一步步的上诉。最终呢，可能这个就是事件呢会到那个最高法院。那么具体的情况呢，我们大家就可能关注时事。如果Sally 如果没有问题，我们就往下一个就是议题了啊。So let's move on. Thank you.
Okay. And any questions, just ask them whenever you want to. And so the second topic, why did I decide to go to law school during college? And it's actually exactly the same reason that we saw in topic number 1. The stakes are high, and I wanted to be able to do a job that had a big impact on the real world. And legal arguments changed the world. So my major in undergraduate was classics. It was Latin and ancient Greek. I wrote my senior thesis about Julius Caesar and his centurions, and I loved it. But ultimately, it was about a figure 2,000 years old, and about military history that is 2,000 years old. So I couldn't have enjoyed the classics more, but I didn't want to live 2,000 years in the past. I wanted to be able to have an impact on the world as it's unfolding. And so that is why I chose not to go into academia. Again, if I were to pick up a book and read about the classics right now, I would have a wonderful time, and it would be the best way I could spend an afternoon if I just wanted to relax. And that's just not what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be able to jump into the world as it's unfolding and be in the midst of these debates about whether Harvard can enroll international students, what free speech means in America, and what the rule of law means. And so much of academia is rooted in very niche topics that are very far removed from the current world and the current problems that are facing and the current problems that I encounter every day, and that, as we're seeing, affect people around the world. That's not to say that classics was a bad major to do in any way for law school. It was great. Again, the three keys to success in law school are hard work, practice, and the ability to make a strong argument. And I got all three of those in the classics. All the time, I would have to write papers about why Julius Caesar was able to overthrow the Roman government, or about poetry, or about art. And so I got a lot of practice making good arguments. They weren't legal arguments, but I still put in a ton of time and a ton of work making compelling arguments and trying to persuade someone of my point. So even though I may have been talking about military history from a long time ago, it's the same principles that the lawyers who are in the courtroom against Trump are making to allow Harvard to get to enroll international students. So that means there's no one major that you have to do in undergraduate in college if you want to go to law school. Any major where you work hard and you make compelling arguments is key. I have good friends at law school who did majors from math, where you have to do equations, and ultimately your job is to prove something in high-level mathematics. And that's not that different from making a compelling argument. Or science, you have to write a paper about why your research is great. Or a lot of my friends are philosophy majors. And I did a lot of philosophy as classics. We read Plato in Greek and things like that. And philosophy is the archetypal subject where you're making arguments, you're trying to convince your opposition point of view, and you do that over and over and over again. And there's no substitute for that practice. And so philosophy is a fantastic major in undergrad. There are very few undergraduate majors at American colleges that are at liberal arts colleges that would serve you poorly if you wanted to go to law school. Being something like an accountant, where you're just counting numbers, that isn't so useful for law school, but almost any major where you make a compelling argument is great for law school. Because again, law schools want to see that you've worked hard, that you've practiced, and that you can make a strong argument. And that's the same with your extracurriculars. I happen to, in college, have walked on to the varsity soccer team, which in retrospect, I would say was probably not the best use of my time, because I'm clearly not going to become a professional soccer player. But it demonstrated to law schools that I knew how to practice and I knew how to work incredibly hard. So even though it was only 2 of the 3, it still demonstrated I could put in 30 hours a week doing soccer while still doing great in school. If I had to recommend what extracurriculars you would do, I would recommend something where you do have to make a strong argument, which I didn't have to in soccer. But the point is that there's no one correct answer to what you have to do. You just have to demonstrate that you can work incredibly hard, that you can practice, and that you can make a good argument. And so you should really do the major that you enjoy doing those 3 things in. And that's why I love the classics. I loved writing papers. I loved making arguments, and I had a great time. And even though I don't do classics in law school, the law school still loved it. So do any of you have any questions?
So I actually have one question. Like I
Absolutely.
believe somehow there was echo on my end, but that's fine. Because when we talked before, you mentioned like your roommates, right? We're all doing computer science, and like at that point, did that worry you? Have you ever thought, oh, I might need to do something because apparently those like tech companies, like you like people will make a lot of money, right? Have that ever worried you when you were studying classics?
It did worry me. I was again worried that I was too rooted in the past and that I wasn't in touch with the world as it was around me. And that's one of the reasons I went to law school was to get skills that are applicable to the real world. All of my roommates at Harvard were computer science majors, and they're all working at major American companies like Facebook and hedge fund called Jane Street doing technology things. And they're enjoying it and they're having a great time. And that's because they learned skills that are much more applicable to the real world than a classics major. And that ultimately is why law school is so important for me, is so that I can get an education that is really applicable to the world as it unfolds. And I would guess that a lot of humanities majors, so a lot of things like philosophy, like literature, like poetry, like classics, if you want to get a high-powered job in America, you're going to need to go and get another round of education, which is what I'm just finished. I just graduated from Yale, whereas my roommates who are computer science majors, they went straight into companies.
Okay, and I think there's another question like
Absolutely.
is about like undergrad majors. Have you seen any students major in like business, like coming from like Wharton at Yale Law School?
Um, At Yale Law School, it's a little less, but there certainly are. I have a number of friends who are dually enrolled in business school and law school, and so they're learning how to do that. Yale is known as the least business oriented of the law schools. It's the most government oriented. It's the most wanting to become a lawyer for the government or a judge or a prosecutor oriented. Harvard Law School, there is a ton of business lawyer crossover, and that's what they're really famous for. And I want to work for the government. That's why I chose Yale. But it's very common practice to dual enroll in business and law, and many people do business and undergrad. But again, I would caution because a lot of people who do business and undergrad don't as often work on these written arguments that are so key to law school.
OK，thank you。这点我说一下，正好我们就是做辩论的 Rudy 老师，他自己呢，也就是MBA 和那个 JD 的双学位。那么刚才就Philip 也讲了，就是哈佛在这方面是非常强的。当时他之所以呢会选择耶鲁，也是因为他自己的目标就是想要为联邦政府去联邦法院，所以选择了最适合这条路径的一个法学院。我希望刚才的，就是另外呢，其实也是我今天也邀请了一些学生过来，就谈到，确实就是文科是我们很多学生就是非常热爱的，尤其是那些打辩论的孩子，如果不是因为对哲学、历史啊、政治的热爱，也不会去进入辩论这样一个课外活动。但是呢，到了大学之后，会发现就是要考虑一些现实的考虑，就像菲利普自己说，因为那种古典学其实在现实社会是挺少有一个直接的应用的。那么他还是比较幸运的，是把他在就学习的古典智慧应用到就是现代的，就是职业当中，可能法律是最适合的。所以这里呢，其实包括刚才就是他也提到，比如说文学专业，我们在去年的讲座当中，其实也是我们之前的学生，是耶鲁的校友，他就说他在哈佛的医学院其实也有些本科是学文学的，所以就是有一点是比较，就是大家可能会考虑美国美本，就是说无论你学什么样的专业，其实大几率呢你都会有很好的就是文理教育。那么文理教育的根基呢，就是教你如何去思辨，也就是他说的 arguments。这点呢其实是文理教育的就是基石哈。就是 the next question actually is you will mention that is about like did you take a gap year before enrolling Yale Law? What's your LSAT score? It's all coming. So like for whoever who asked that question, that is coming on the next slide.
Absolutely. So, what makes a successful application? And these are successful academic arguments. Again, it's the three keys. It's practice, it's hard work, and it's strong arguments. So law schools really like to look for written work because that is what law is all about. think about the 75-page document that the Harvard lawyers submitted overnight in court to win the preliminary injunction against the Trump administration to, for now, end the ban. It's those kind of written arguments that are the key to law school and are the key to demonstrating you can do that on an application. So you want to have substantial body of written work that you can demonstrate, that you can point to. Say you wanted to have done really well in a senior thesis. Publishing articles of really any kind are great. And they want to see that you have a strong track record of disciplined success. They want to see that you made, not only can you make a good argument, but that your own career is a good argument. So just like an argument needs a thesis and needs supporting points, so too should you be able to say, look, I want to be a lawyer, and these are the 1, 2, 3, 4 things that all work together to what is going to make me a good lawyer. And there's no one answer for this. There are many different ways you can do this, but you have to think about what is your answer? What is your thesis? So you should be able to sum up in about a sentence and a half what makes you a compelling law student, and then have a bunch of building blocks that you took the time to work on in college that all support that. It's all about thesis and supporting evidence. That's the key to law school. That's the key to applications. And it's really can be any number of things. I have friends who did the most far left clean energy work and humanitarian work in random places in the world. I had friends who did hardcore business in New York City, working for Goldman Sachs. I charted a more middle path. I did a lot of government work. So I said, I want to work for the government and be a public servant lawyer. But just as long as you have a compelling story that you can tell, that is the key. And you want to be able to write well. So your application should be well written, and then you should be able to demonstrate that you have written things well during college. And there, again, is no substitute for that except practice. It's just practice. No one is born being good at this. No one gets good at this overnight. You just have to do it over and over and over again. And I will get to the LSAT, which is the other part of the score, the other part of the application on the next slide. But I can tell you that's practice too. So for writing, you should just try and write a lot in college and demonstrate that in your application. I know that seems simple. That is really the key to what a good law school application is. And you should write your application essay probably 15 times, is my advice, at least. You should just rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it until it gets to be great.
Okay, so Philip, I have a question. Like based
Yes.
on what you explained, it seems like for example, your GPA definitely has connection with your like the quality of the written work, right? And then in terms of like track record of disciplined practice, it's more like assume what do you do extracurricular and what do you do over the summers, right? And
Yes.
so that sort of built your like spike and like everyone like who applying to, I assume everyone can pass baseline, got good LSAT and also solid written work. But the differentiator always being like what you been doing like extracurricular wise and also like summers, like basically like internships or research, right?
Yes. And so you should try and be able to tell one consistent story about the summer work you've been doing, the extracurricular work you've been doing. Again, I spent all my summers working in government, and so I was able to tell a story about wanting to be a government lawyer, and that appealed to the law schools because many lawyers work for the government. But you can do many different things. So if you did business, 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 and then you say, I want to be the titan of industry of law firms, that's a compelling consistent story. What I would caution against is trying to do 6 different things and being okay in many different things. But as you said, not having that one, because you really want to be able to stand out. And again, you want to think about having one thesis. And so that thesis, you has to hold consistently throughout the extracurriculars you did, throughout the summer jobs you did. And you want to think about what that thesis is. Again, I did varsity soccer, which again is not what I would recommend someone else do in retrospect. It was a little weird, and I think it was a mistake in retrospect, but at least it demonstrated I could work incredibly hard and was very disciplined. And America is kind of obsessed with sports for reasons I don't understand. But you should be able to tell one consistent story throughout your extracurriculars and your grades. And you do have to get good grades, because if you didn't get good grades, then the school assumed you didn't work that hard or you weren't that disciplined in school. So that is a prerequisite to showing you can work hard and that you practice a lot is getting good grades.
Okay, thank you. And I think like varsity soccer actually definitely has helped you because like 30 hours a week, that says a lot of your like work ethic. And while you are still handling the full-time like rigorous academic work. And I do have one question though, because you walked on, right?
I did.
And I assume those you were like facing those kind of recruited athletes for varsity soccer. So, like, were you kind of like, so with that luck, you were still able to play for varsity, or just a lot of like recruits just like decide not to continue in
Um,
college?
I mean, I was one of only two, and then at the very end, three walk-ons on the team. So it's not like the whole team disappeared and I walked on. There were very few of us. There's always a little bit of luck to be able to walk on to a varsity team. So I certainly think I got a little lucky. Uh, I would say that I enjoyed playing the soccer. I don't think that a lot of the recruited athletes were quite as academically motivated as I was. So I get the feeling that I would say, hey guys, I have to go, spend the whole night studying. They thought it was a little odd. But that was just one of the costs of trying to do well in school. And I have no regret about working hard in school. So that I enjoyed and would do over again. Again, if I had to do it again, I did demonstrate that I could work incredibly hard at something, but I think I would have preferred to work incredibly hard at something more academically focused in my extracurriculars. And I would say that that's probably a better thing to do on your law school application.
Okay, okay, thank you for that advice. Could you tell us what did you do for each summer then? Like, yeah.
Sure. So for the first summer, I worked at a political campaign in Connecticut. The second summer, I worked for a mayor's campaign. In the third summer, I did what's called Officer Candidate School for the United States Marines. And that is the equivalent of boot camp, all squished into a summer. And so that was very rigorous and very intense. And again, showed I could work very hard and could take a lot of adverse conditions. And it all played into me of wanting to work for the government. So I had government in three slightly different ways. And I would urge everyone to think about your first, your second, and your third summer all sort of working together. And then I was already accepted into law school when I graduated from college. And then I spent a gap year working at law firms in New York, which I enjoyed tremendously. But that wasn't part of my law school application. But I worked at Sullivan and Cromwell, and then I worked at another firm called Olshan from Wolosky, which I don't think you guys have heard of. But they were both in New York City, and they both were high-powered corporate firms.
OK OK，Thank you。我这里稍微总结一句啊，其实呢，如果要申请法学院，如果这里我们有高中生的话，我觉得是很好，因为确实你要一开始就要想好自己将来就是说自己的一个区分度在哪里。那么Philip 呢，他是基于自己就是非常就是一直想为就是政府工作，所以呢，他其实第一、第二年暑假呢，他所讲的那种就是 campaign 为竞选啊各个方面，其实这个呢其实比较容易得到的职位，相对来说，比如说你在任何一个就是州或者在任何一个省，如果你想去就是为他们去就是做这样的这议员呢，去做这样的一些工作，其实都是蛮容易得到的。所以这些呢，就从一些比较容易就是能够就是获得的一些就是机会开始，那么一步步的到大三，那么他其实就有一些就是比较难获得的一些工作机会。所以这些呢，也是一个我觉得很好值得借鉴的一个经验吧，另外呢，就是他也讲到，其实虽然呢，他就是足球可能一定程度上也是帮助了他的申请，但是他觉得其实是对于就是并不是最有效的利用他的时间。反正这个方面呢，我觉得也是很赞同的，因为确实每周30个小时是很大的一个 commitment. Okay, so because we don't have other questions, and then we'll move on to LSAT. Thank
Okay.
you.
So the law schools all want to make sure you do fantastically well in school, but they also need to know that you can do well on the standardized test. And the LSAT I will tell you, it's all just about understanding and making strong arguments. And the only way to get good at that, you've guessed, is practice and hard work. So you got to take practice tests, you got to take lots of practice tests, and you got to take even more practice tests. The LSAT you can buy previous versions of the LSAT online, and you can get up to about 100 of them, maybe even more, and you should just take tons of practice tests. There's no magic bullet that is going to make you understand the LSAT, that's going to make you do it brilliantly. It's just a time and practice thing. And I think that's actually one of the points that the law school want to check. They want to make sure that you're willing to put in a lot of time and effort to do well on this standardized test. So the LSAT has now two components. It has reading comprehension and it has logical reasoning. It used to have something called logic games, which when I took it, but they've gotten rid of that. And reading comprehension, you just read a passage of text that has come from some real world publication, and you're basically identifying arguments and you're identifying the main points of the passage. Then logical reasoning, you get one tiny little paragraph that they have made up. And again, you're trying to identify what's the best argument or what was the flaw in the argument. But it's all about logical arguments and how to make a good logical argument. And so you just have to practice this over and over again. I never took a course. I never took an LSAT course. I bought one book about how to do the logical reasoning and read about half of it, but I didn't think it was that useful. But I did take a lot of tests. I think I took about 60 or 70 practice LSAT tests, and it made a huge difference. The first practice LSAT test I got a 163, and the LSAT is you get either from a 120 to a 180. So the first one I got a 163, and then when I took the official test, and that the one I submitted to the law schools, I got a 176. For reference, the median LSAT score at Yale and at Stanford and at a lot of the top law schools is about a 174, 175. And at Harvard Law School, it's about a 173. And it varies. But if you want to get into a top law school, you basically have to get over a 170. And if you want your LSAT score to be positive, a good part of your application, you want it to be 174 or higher. But I clearly didn't get that the first time I took it. As a practice test, I got a 163. And I kept a graph of my score and how many tests I took, and it just went up the more tests I took. And in fact, in retrospect, I hadn't stopped getting higher scores, so I probably should have taken more practice tests. But it all worked out, so it's not a big deal. But if you want to do well on the LSAT, there is really no substitute for taking practice tests, and you should take at least 50, but especially now that each practice test is shorter because there's only 2 sections, I would really recommend you take 75 plus practice tests. And of course, review each practice test after you're done, but there just is no substitute for practice. And I think most of the LSAT courses really are just a way to force people to take a lot of practice tests. So it's hard work and it's practice, and that's how you get able to make a good argument. And that's the key to LSAT preparation.
May I know in total for how long you spent on like practices?
Sure. So I spent about 2.5 months, and that's why I did about 60 tests, because I took a practice test a day for two and a half months.
Okay, so like each day, how many hours?
So when I took it, an LSAT was about 2 hours, and then you would spend, an hour reviewing it and going over each question you got wrong incredibly carefully. So I'd say it was about 3.5, maybe 4 hours, depending on how long you took every single day. Now the LSAT is shorter because, again, they took out one of the sections I did, but you should still think about the same general time. So it's a big time commitment, and that's the way to succeed. There's no substitute for hard work.
Okay, yeah, because your starting point is pretty high, right? Because without any practice, you got 163. It's pretty high, and for like one who did zero prep, right? So what do you contribute to that, like initial, like high starting point?
Again, it's the hard work and practice. I had spent my whole college life doing arguments, making arguments. a lot of the LSAT is shorter kind of arguments than a big paper. So imagine if you're in a really close debate with a friend and you're just going back and forth debating with a friend. That is the key kind of practice and how to think about the LSAT. I never did debate officially as an extracurricular, but I spend almost all my free time just debating with friends about politics, about life, about who knows what. I just like to debate. And my family, we were big debaters too. So every dinner conversation was debating. So you just want to practice thinking about how to make really quick, pithy, strong arguments. And debate is one of the best ways to do that. A ton of my friends at Yale Law were big debaters. And I would say that debate and that kind of thinking is the best preparation to doing well on the LSAT before you even start. But as I said, you will get a lot better the more practice you do, and everything really is just practice. It's not that complicated. So you just have to practice the kind of thinking, and the kind of LSAT thinking is logical, quick debate thinking.
OK，OK，Thank you。对，我这里讲一下啊，其实我特别赞同啊，他说就是辩论或者是思辨，他就是 Philip 讲到在自己家里哈，是就是喜欢跟父母之间讨论这些时事政治，同时他跟他因为相信他上这种就是文科类的课程，其实在课堂当中也有很多这样的一个讨论，那么导致他的起分点呢就很高163，但是呢，就是 Philip 从来没有就是正式的做过任何的辩论，但是我们的就是我们 Web 的老师呢 Mars 呢，他也是就是哈佛，就是他是本身是学的政治，那么也是整个就是学生阶段呢，其实他做了很多很多的就是辩论，那么也曾经是哈佛辩论队的就是主教练，那么他呢其实也考过 LSAT， 那基本上就没有怎么复习哈，就是可能做了1-2套题，就是了解大概考试怎么回事情。他的分数也是在173分加，具体的分数我不记得了。那么确实是，就是我看有家长问，LSAT 的准备，那么其实呢，你如果就是在高中阶段就开始做辩论的话，那相信你到时候开始去就是准备 LSAT， 应该不会需要花这么多时间。Okay, like I just want to ask one question. Like you got like a good, a strong LSAT score, right? You also got like a very solid, assume GPA, and you got your spike or your consistent theme of government work. And so, but I assume like a lot of applicants to law school also, right, got similar stats or their own passions or their own, like what made you, because you got into all top 5 law schools. It's a very impressive. Is there any secret, like in retrospect?
I don't think there are that many people who have graduated magna cum laude from Harvard and got a 176 on the LSAT and are applying. So it's a smaller group than you would, and magna cum laude is my grade metric. So it means I was in the top 10% of Harvard. Okay. So I don't think there are that many people like that who apply to law school. And then I think I just wrote a very compelling story about why I wanted to work in the government. And I don't think it's super special beyond that. If you graduate magna cum laude from a top American university, you do fantastically well on the LSAT, and you are able to write a human. So they know I did well in school. They know I did well on the LSAT. Then you have to give, your human side and tell a good story. And so I think I told a very good story about why I want to work in government. And I think they thought I was the kind of person who should be at the law school. But I don't think it's that complicated beyond telling a very compelling story, great grades, and the LSAT. Certainly, I spoke with a Harvard professor who didn't know much about me, a Harvard law professor who didn't know that much about me. And he said, what's your GPA? What's your LSAT? And he said, oh, I almost guarantee you'll get into Harvard Law. So if you get really good grades and a really good LSAT at one of these top schools, you are doing very, and in an interesting major, which classics is a pretty highly regarded major, you have a very high chance of getting into these schools. All 5, I think, is because of the personal story I told in the applications.
Okay. OK，and thank you。是这样子啊，其实刚才他讲到有点就是有一点，因为本身作为就是哈佛本科，然后 top 10%，这个其实就是一个非常很少有人能够得到这样的这样一个池子里。那么另外这个176就是是180的满分，确实也是非常有说服力的一个就是 LSAT 的分数。其实这点呢，其实也就讲到一个专业，因为古典学其实就是这种希腊的智慧，其实所有好多法律啊，然后治国的就政治哲学，其实都来于古希腊的哲人，所以这些呢也是有一定的相关性的。所以他讲到就是他认为这3点，另外他还有一个就是文书当中讲到让人过目不忘，让人就深深打动，就是阅读就是你文书的招生观，这些呢其实我觉得跟我们本科爬常青藤是没有两样的。就是你来自一个非常非常好的一个高中，那么这个高中你是高中的前几名同时呢你就是有很好的成绩标化，同时呢也有一个非常有趣的让人很过目不忘的一个文书里的一个叙事。那么还有一点呢，你选择的一个就是专业方向也不是那么的卷，那么这一点呢，其实这几点呢都会就是一个成功的一个因素。那我再问一下 Philip。So Philip, it's slightly off topic, right? But I think because we have a lot of like probably high school students here,
Mhm.
and like you're talking about one of your biggest advantage. Like actually, you went to Harvard, right? You did really well there. But for many high school students, right, the first hurdle and they are facing would be how to get into Harvard, right? Yeah, I know it's slightly like different like stories there. Like it's like we were talking about law school. Do you think also you got like quite a similar kind of like a narrative? Like you have a very compelling personal story, good grades coming from a good like high school, and also you got your unique interest in classics.
So it's the exact same. I got good grades, I did well on the SAT, and I had thesis. I had an argument that was consistent across what I did for why I should be in these schools, and that was the classics. I took extra classes in high school to be able to do Latin and ancient Greek, and that was a very unusual thing. In America, there are probably 15, 20 people who do Latin and ancient Greek in high school a year. And so that makes you a sort of unique person. And I built my application around that consistent story that I devoted time to the classics. I thought about classics. And you should think about what is your story? What is your compelling argument? And you should think about how to put all your building blocks together. So I spent summers thinking about classics, took a lot of classes, obviously did Latin and ancient Greek in high school, but it's the same general principle as law school as in college. You got to have thesis. You got to have one thesis with all the building blocks that you've put together. And
Yeah.
I think when I see people who think they're incredibly strong applicants and don't get into the schools they want, it's because they've done 1,000 different things and they're good at all of those things, but they don't really stand out at any one. And so you really want to think about what is your spike was the word you used, and that's exactly right. What is your spike? What is your thesis? What is your argument? And it can't just be I'm generally good at things. It has to be a more compelling, particular argument.
Yeah, I think it's also very authentic. You sound like you live in classics, breathing like classics. So I still have one question. You said you took additional classes, right? Did you take those classes online or did you take them like at colleges back then in high school?
I took them through my high school actually. I just
Okay.
asked teachers if they could have additional classes for me, and that's what I did. My partner, my fiance, she went to Harvard with me. That's where we met, and she's doing her PhD at Yale now. She took a lot of extra college classes while she was in high school, and that I think is what made her stand out. And she got into Harvard and MIT and Yale for undergrad. So taking extra classes in a defined subject, I think is very important. Sorry to bring my fiance into this, but that's just another example. So
So can I ask you, so your high school did not offer those classes. You
it
basically
offered
went to the, oh, sorry.
No. I shouldn't have interrupted. That's rude.
Yeah.
It offered Latin. And again, most people who did Latin seriously in college also did ancient Greek.
Okay.
And so the Latin teachers at my high school, they also knew ancient Greek, but I had to go to them and I had to say, please, can we do and add ancient Greek? And I was lucky enough to go to a high school that accommodated that. But
Okay.
in my experience in high school and in college, a lot of professors, not all of them, but a lot of professors really love and teachers love what they do. And if you can demonstrate you love what they do too, and you really want to do it because you love it, they are more happy to oblige than you might think. I mean, these college professors, they've spent 50 years doing this. It's their great passion. And you would be passionate too if you had a student come to you and say, I want to do what you did. I want to follow in your footsteps. Teach me to be more like you. And so I think that is an easier path to do than most people realize. And it just takes a lot of initiative.
Yes, yes, that's great. So assume your Latin teacher wrote you amazing, outstanding letter.
I've never read the letter of recommendation, but it was my Latin and ancient Greek teachers in high school who wrote my letters of rec. And then in college, it was again classics professors who wrote my actually Latin and ancient Greek professor who wrote my letter of recommendation to college, to law school. So
Okay.
you really have to, it's important to build a relationship with teachers. That's also very important. Go to office hours. Go to office hours. That's key.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah, like，是这样。这个刚才这 Philip 讲的，其实因为之前我也是在学校的老师，确实我记得，就我们学校也有拉丁，那么是没有希腊语这一门课的。当时也是在10多年前，确实有这样，也有遇到这样一个学生过来找学校谈，找老师谈，就是说希望能够开设这门课程。当时首先第一步啊，就是如果你想走这样同样的这样一个路径哈，是这样子。首先你要跟老师谈，老师就是说他愿意教。那么这样子的话，你最好呢能够再找上1、2个学生。虽然我们也是一个小私立学校，可能但一个学生去开一个课是很难的，除非你是就是可能 board 的，就是 director 的，就是我们也有啊，是校董的孩子，我们以前也会开过。但普通的就是孩子呢，一般你至少找到1、2个也同样有这个爱好的，就是同学。然后呢，这样老师呢才更好，更能跟学校校方去争取这样的资源来开这门课程。那么我记得当时在我们学校就是要求开这门希腊语的学生，他后来呢是去了牛津。那么当时也是他的这拉丁老师写了非常非常强的推荐信。那么这个其实如果是现在是高中生啊，其实这是一点就是蛮值得借鉴的。Okay, thank you. Because I was a high school teacher too, and what your story remind me a former student who who ended up Oxford like doing Latin, and exact same story. She wanted like for people who are interested in Latin classics, they really wanted to learn Greek, right? And
Yeah,
so that's exactly our school did not offer that because so few students would be interested in.
it's the exact
So,
same for me.
but a lot of initiative. I was very impressed. I like
So that's
if
exactly,
yeah, if you went to my high school, I think the teacher would all like you, right, for this kind of passion initiative. But I taught at an all girls school, but that would never happen. But thank you, yeah, thank you for sharing the insights
absolutely.
there.
Teachers want to like you. It's an important thing to remember. Sometimes you think they're scary, but most teachers want to like students. So you just gotta give them the ability to like you. But I'll go on to the next topic.
Yeah, so one more question, like
Yeah. Oh,
assume
sorry.
it's a little bit out of context, but I assume it's for law school application. Just
Mhm.
like I heard that internships are not that important for like law school application. What's your feeling on that?
Doing any one internship in a summer in college, again, not that important. It's only important insofar as it helps you tell the narrative and tell the thesis of your overall argument. So again, your internship should build on each other, and the law school doesn't care so much about which internship specific one you did. They care about how all of them together let you tell one story. So in that sense, no single internship, you're right, is all that important, but all together, the story they tell is very important.
Okay. 就是我想讲一下，其实真的就是具体做什么，一定要持续的做哈。然后所有的做呢，其实就指向一个方向、一个路径，是非常非常重要的。我这里说一个题外话，就是我们去年的时候帮一个之前的学生，他呢其实是想转学转到就是沃顿下面。那么之前呢，其实他当时呢就是一个什么样的就是故事呢？其实你会听得觉得特别可笑。为什么这样的故事，导致他能够就是其实当时那个全校只有一个名额，他转去那个项目。那么他讲的就是什么？他在高中开始，他就一直想要就是做一个项目，就是给教老人一些就是怎么样就是现代科技，但是那个失败了，因为当时有就是老人也有各种各样的规定。那么后来呢，到了大学呢，他又想创业，他们想做那个充电桩，但是又失败了哈。那么因为就是面临当时就是对于那种充电桩呢，美国有各种各样的一些政府规定。那么后来呢，他在做这个转学的这个申请过程当中，他就写的一次次这样的一个失败，让他知道他其实作为一个工程的学生，他其实要学习就是法律，那么这样才能更好的成为一个做创新。其实挺有意思的，就是我只是想给，就是我不知道谁问的这个问题啊，就是说其实你做什么都不重要，但是你要有个主题，同时这个主题能够让你讲一个非常让人就幸福的、很有说服力的一个故事，就是 storytelling. Yeah, I think like compiling arguments also being a storytelling. How you tell
Absolutely.
like a very like memorable narrative. Yeah, it's the same thing.
Same
Thank
thing.
you. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. So I'll go on to the next topic if there's no other
Yes.
questions. So AI is a big issue in the law these days and a big issue in the world, but it actually, in my mind, just means even more you have to focus on the argument. Ultimately, in America, all law is decided by humans. When you go into a trial for murder, say, it's 12 regular jurors, 12 people plucked off the street, out of factories, out of shops, and they're the ones who vote innocent or guilty. The judge is a person too. So you're making arguments to people, and you got to think about how to make those arguments. AI will replace some of what lawyers do, but I actually think it'll make being a lawyer much more fun. So, as I said, the three keys to being successful in the law are hard work, practice, and making a strong argument. When you work at a law firm like I did, you realize that most of the people actually only do the hard work and don't actually ever get to do the fun part of making the argument. The very lowest junior associates and the paralegals, they review documents and they do really difficult, hard, kind of repetitive work. And it's the more senior people who get to make the really fun, the great arguments, the ones who get to think about the issues. And those are the people who have very interesting jobs. And the lower people, it's less interesting. And it's those repetitive, kind of uninteresting jobs like document review that AI really might replace. So it might be a little harder to break into the legal market, but if you go and can show you can rise to the top by making good arguments, you will have a much better life and it'll be much better. And I bet you will be more highly paid because it'll be just the people making the good arguments, and all the money and all the rewards and all the attention will shift to them. And this makes preparation to make good arguments even more key. No one is born being able to make a good argument. No one, even in high school, can make a good argument out of nowhere. It all takes practice, practice, practice. And with AI becoming more powerful, the kind of brute force work in law schools in law firms that doesn't take practice, the document review that any smart, hardworking person can do, that might get eliminated. So it's all about the ability to make a strong argument. That is what will separate everybody, and that will become even more important. And so I look forward to AI's impact on the legal field, because I think it'll just eliminate jobs that aren't that interesting, aren't that fun, and will leave all the best parts of the law still to humans.
Thank you. But inevitably, which will means there will be fewer lawyers, fewer
There might be.
lawyers. Yeah, yeah.
America has more lawyers per capita than almost any other Western country. So it might bring us more in line with other countries, because right now we have a huge amount of lawyers per capita. But AI might mean there are fewer lawyers. I mean, we're seeing how AI means there are going to be fewer coders. There's going to be fewer. It's going to have an impact on a lot of fields. And unlike in coding, I shouldn't speak too much about coding because again, I was not the computer science major. But in the law, it'll make the law a better field to work in.
Thank you。确实，我个人感觉也是这样子的。就是 AI 作为一个工具，其实是解放了，就是从很多低端的工作当中，其实把各种职业解放出来。但同样带来的挑战就是导致这些行业的入门的门槛变高了。那么就是从 Phil 他本身来讲，他从最好的就是美国排名第一的法学院毕业，那么有这样就是大家也看到他这样的一个表达能力、思辨能力，他觉得其实对他这样的一类人才来说，其实 AI 只会是让他们就是更加如鱼得水。所以呢，我觉得有一点呢是非常非常重要的，就是说真的要找到自己的擅长和热爱，这依然是不变的。So like you also have like a sub point ethics of flawed
Sorry.
judges.
So this is
Yeah.
a key point. As AI gets better and better, the question is, one of the big questions in law is, are we going to accept that humans are flawed? Because I can tell you, I've worked with juries, I've worked with judges, they make mistakes. The 12 random people that are got off the street to be the jurors, they are flawed. They're certainly not perfect people, and they do make mistakes. And so the question is, do we want flawed decision makers making mistakes? And the ethical question is really, is AI flawed, or what makes AI flawed? And the big philosophical defining question of the future is whether we want to replace these humans with AIs and what the ethics of that is. Is it better for humans that you can look in the face to make 2 mistakes for every 1 mistake this nameless AI makes? What does it mean for AI to make an ethical mistake? If I were to predict what are the fundamental questions that are going to be asked in the law 50, 60 years from now, it'll be the ethics of AI. So that was just why I put that in there. But to highlight that for now, it's all about arguments to people, but that will be a pressure point of the law that everyone should think about. And if you are ignoring the ethics of AI, you are willfully burying your head in the sand to a key point in the law.
Okay. I did not know about that because
Okay.
probably you know, or like because you're going to judge for our like TKEthics like
Yes.
Olympia. That actually is a debate about ethics of technology, and but I think for law field that kind of question will come much later because right now the most of the debates around like ethics in the tech field. So you really brought up a very good point. I think probably we could use that for future motions, but it's so complicated. Like
It's
as
very
you were,
complicated.
yeah, framing the questions like I just find there's no easy question there because human they do make mistakes, right? You witnessed like we all witnessed a lot. So yeah, that's a kind of such a complicated question. It's hard to answer, but I think that's for every industry and every like
Absolutely.
yeah, like it's facing this common like a challenge there.
Absolutely. Everybody should think about it, and everyone should debate about it. I'm a pro debater, so you should go home and have a debate with your parents about whether, with your loved ones or with your brother or sister, about whether you think you would want AI to judge you if you were convicted or if you were on trial for a crime. And think about that. Would you want a flawed human, or would you want this AI to judge you if you were in front of a tribunal for a crime? Anyways, sorry, I'm going off topic, but
But that's important though, and that's definitely something like in the future we all will be facing.
absolutely.
Okay.
So that does bring us to our conclusion. And so the conclusion is think about arguments. Law school is all about the ability to make an argument, the ability to write good argument, and the ability to identify a good argument and pick apart a bad argument. And so this is all about clarity of thought. It's about dialogue and it's about insight. And these are the skills that are fostered through Ethics Olympiad. Again, I didn't do official debate, but if you don't spend your time debating and thinking about these issues, you can't become a lawyer. Everything is practice, everything is hard work, and you have to just devote hours and hours and hours of your time to debating and thinking about these issues. And Ethics Olympiad, which is a structured way, is something you can put on a law school application or a college application. All of my debating, you couldn't put on an application. And so if I had to do it over again, I would do something like Ethics Olympiad instead of varsity soccer. But that is just my big takeaway is think about arguments, make arguments, and pick apart arguments wherever you find them and whoever is willing to debate them with you. And that's the key of law school, and that'll define the future of the law field. Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, I just realized I just missed one question.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, since we just mentioned Ethics Olympia, there's another extracurricular in high school extracurricular. I'm sure you probably did not do that. That's kind of the mock trial, right? You heard of a mock trial, right?
Of course. So
Do you think a mock trial would be helpful, like for law school applications?
So mock trial, I think, is less helpful than people realize. Mock trial is, again, a great way to make arguments and to practice making arguments. And in that sense, it fits with everything I've said. I actually think that law schools don't view mock trial versus debate versus philosophy versus a number of different fields all that differently. So I don't think they give that much more weight to mock trial than they do to other formats that let you debate and think and make strong arguments over and over and over again. So by all means, there's nothing wrong with mock trial. It fits everything I've said about what's good on an application. I just think it doesn't stand out as much as most people think. The law schools, they think they are the only ones who can give a great legal education. So they think that, whether or not you took a law class in college or whether or not you did debate, that doesn't matter. They just want to make sure you have the tools that they'll mold into a great lawyer.
OK，OK，Thank you。对，其实是这样子的，就是人的一些就是基本的能力，可能是这些顶级的法学院更看重的，真的并不是某一段的，就是一种相关的一些就是课外活动。因为其实当你在你就热爱的、擅长的领域能够做出非常就是突出的成绩的时候，其实就证明了你有他们所需要的基本的能力，而不是就是某一种活动。So a question is like, how many years you spent on law school?
Law school is 3 years.
3 years.
3 years. And
Yeah, so
you all,
in between you also got some like practicum, right? Did you do some like internship?
So the first summer I worked for the United States Department of Justice, the government in Washington, D.C. The second summer, almost everybody at law school works for a law firm, and that's what I did. I worked for Sullivan and Cromwell, which is based in New York, and I worked at Sullivan and Cromwell in white collar criminal defense, but almost everybody works at a law firm. And so for the next 2 years, I'll be going to clerk for federal judges. So again, I'll be working for the government. I'll be assisting a judge in how they make decisions because I ultimately want to become a government lawyer. But because I worked at the law firm my second summer, I have a return offer to go back to that law firm if I want it. I can take it after my clerkships, or I can do anything I want. And they pay you quite well their second summer. So almost everybody works for a law firm. And the general principle is you work in whatever your passion is your first summer, which for me is government. That's why I work for government. And then your second summer, you work for a law firm. You get a return offer to go back to the law firm, and you can choose to take that or not.
Okay, thank you. And so next question, like I know like those top law schools also take international students, and however, I do want to ask a question like because due to like current like political climate, were those international students find it harder to like find an internship?
They find it a little. So I'll put it this way. Clerking, which is what I'm going to do, where you work for a judge, international students can't really do that. The judges tend to take citizens to work for them because it's for the United States government. The law firms, they love to take international people. You maybe have to be open to the idea that they want to send you abroad after a few years because these are global law firms. So Sullivan and Cromwell, the one I worked at, has offices all over the world, and they make a lot of their money being international. And in fact, they love students who are bilingual and can speak multiple languages because those are the students who can go out and work with the New York business, also work with clients all around the world. I will say this is predated Trump. After you finish law school, you get a couple of years to work on a visa. And then after that, it becomes a little more difficult and the law firm has to sponsor you. And so a few years after law school, there's sort of an inflection point where it can be a little difficult to get a work visa to continue working. But if you go to one of these big law firms and whatever happens, you don't get the visa 3 years after law school, they absolutely love to have you work for their international offices. It's a huge boon to them. So I have a friend, she's from South America, and I think the law firm would love to pay her mountains of money to be a great Spanish English lawyer in South America.
Okay, okay.
And she's
Thank you.
working in New York firms for the next couple of years.
OK，对，刚才这个问题可能是刚才他回答的，可能是我们就是很多国际生家庭特别关注的。首先呢，就是说，确实你要拿到像 Philip 那种联邦，就是跟法官这样做助理的这样的职位，确实需要是美国公民。但是呢，就是大量的就是那些就是律师行，他们是不需要的，他们其实是应该他们是招募的大户啊，就是你作为国际生，你是完全可以在那里拿到实习的，但当然你要是需要比较优秀的哈，在法学院里面。那么一般呢，就是说你在毕业之后，所以你不存在能不能就是只要你拿到实习哈，就是应该就能够毕业，而且呢是从一个非常排名非常好的法学院，基本上不可能就是拿不到实习的。那么毕业之后呢，你国际生的身份呢，确实是你有，就是因为就美国的签证，你可以在美国工作就是3年。那么这3年当中，如果你没有办法就是拿不到 H1 的话，那这些大的国际的就是公司，他就会把你派到他们就外派出去。因为这种外派呢，其实是挺好的，就是说，尤其到一些比较相对来说比较落后的地区，就是说你相当于又有补贴，然后又有这边的工资，其实未必是一个就是坏事哈。So I do have the one question. So in order to graduate as a JD, right? Do you are those internships mandatory? You must have those internships.
No, not at all.
In order to receive.
You can do anything you want. The law firms, again, they pay you $45,000 to not do very much work for the summer to get a guaranteed return offer. So there's a lot of good reasons to spend your second summer at a law firm. It's free $45,000 and an incredibly high-paying job if you want it, but you absolutely don't have to work at the law firms. I know people who are going off and doing random academics things. I know friends who are doing, you absolutely don't have to do any specific internship to graduate. It's just there are a lot of good reasons to work for a law firm your second summer.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, but like, here's a question. Like like those like top law firm internships, kind of like very competitive. Is there any tip to stand out, like to secure an intern like that?
If you go to a top American law school and you don't flunk your grades in law school, you're pretty much guaranteed to get one of these internships.
Yes, I agree. 就真的就是可能法学院是一个特别讲究出身和排名的，其他的学校没有这么多，所以一定就是如果有一些排名比较厚的法学院是不值得读的，这点真的是这样，可能以后会越来越这样子。所以呢，我们之前就是2年前呢，我们就请过一个就是 guest speaker，他呢也是，他当时呢是从加拿大就是多大考到了就是一个也还不错的一个法学院，就是 WashU St. Louis。那么在第2年，他就申请转到了 Harvard Law School。他这样后来以后的 story 就一帆风顺。那我再问 Philip 最后一个问题啊。So I know like you need to go. Like Philip, I just ask you one last question.
Absolutely.
Because since like ranking of law school is so important, like for someone's career, and I know not everyone will be able to get into the top law schools first attempt. So we did had a guest speaker who initially actually got into WashU St. Louis Law School, which is still a decent law school, right? It's a great school. And but most of them, like actually his classmates tried so hard to transfer. So he ended up second year, he ended up being at Harvard Law School. And so like at like Yale Law School, like how many like your classmates, like your graduating class actually got transferred in, not initially, first year?
It's about 10, 15. We have a class of about 205, and I think 15 or so are transfers.
Okay.
So I'd say about a little under 10%.
Okay, okay. And yeah, so like for people who really want to have a good career, and if they could not get in first time and second time, they still got the transfer chance there. I think that's kind of like a very，就是我觉得刚才问那个问题的家长，其实这个真的或者学生，这个非常非常重要，就是你的 law school 排名，确实是会影响到将来整个的一个走向。So that's kind of why you decide to apply to all the top five, just based on the ranking, like top five law schools. So make sure you will secure one, like acceptance, right?
Absolutely. In law schools, there's not that much of a marginal cost to applying to more because they don't have essays that are that individualized. So it doesn't take that much time, and the application fee is pretty low. I will also say that I applied during college, and that is most people apply after they graduate college. And your application will probably be a little stronger if you're 24 and you've worked 2 years. So if you apply in college and you don't get into the school you want, I highly recommend. There's absolutely nothing wrong with working a year or two and then applying to law school.
Okay, okay, thank you. And thank you so much. And like Sally, if there are no more questions, and we're going to end today's presentation. Thank you so much, Philip. And I know busy week, you just graduated Monday and then spent a lot of time with me, like preparing for this presentation. I really appreciate that a lot. And
Absolutely.
also, we look forward to having you like in August judging at our TK Ethics Grand Final. And thank you so much. Yeah.
It's been a pleasure to be here, and I wish everybody the best.
Okay, and so enjoy the rest of the weekend, and
Thank
we'll
you
be
so
in
much.
touch then. Bye for now.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Philip.
Bye.